I always thought the worst day of my life would involve a drill or a root canal gone wrong. Turns out, walking in on my wife mid-session with another man in my own clinic takes the cake. Yep, I opened that door, and there they were, going at it like some bad soap opera. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, oh, trust me it did. Buckle up, because this ride is about to get messy. I'm 45 now, a dentist by trade, and I've been running my own clinic for about 12 years. Sounds like I should be living the dream, right? Owning your own clinic, being your own boss. But if I'm honest, the dream's gotten a little shaky lately. It feels like everything is a constant juggling act, and lately I've been dropping a lot more balls than I care to admit. Let me break it down for you. First off, there's the clinic. You'd think having your own practice means security, but man, no one ever warns you how fast things can turn. Business isn't what it used to be. I remember when we first opened. We were booked solid. It was like we couldn't keep up with the demand. But in the last few years, it's been a slow grind downhill. More competition, people cutting back on healthcare, insurance companies being a pain. And let's not forget the online reviews. One bad Yelp review, and suddenly, you're spending hours trying to manage the damage. Scarlett, my wife, works as an orthodontist in the clinic. She's been the backbone of this place, to be honest. She helps with the patients, runs the books, deals with the suppliers, even handles the staff when they start getting a little too comfortable. Without her, I don't think we'd have lasted this long. But even with her help, we're still struggling. We've had to cut back on staff, and we're constantly looking for ways to trim the fat, but at the end of the day, there's only so much you can cut before you're bleeding out. It's exhausting. We got 2 kids, a daughter, 15, and a son, 13. I'd love to say we're the picture-perfect family, but let's be real. My daughter? She's at that age where everything I say is met with an eye roll. I try to connect, but she's either glued to her phone or out with her friends. It's like I'm speaking a different language half the time. I know she's dealing with her own teenage stuff, but it feels like we're on different planets. My son? He's 13, and he's at that awkward stage where he's too cool to hang out with dad, but not old enough to be fully independent. He's into video games, and honestly, I think if it were up to him, he'd never leave his room. Scarlett says I need to spend more time with him, maybe try getting into his world, but after a long day at the clinic, all I want to do is collapse. And then there's my marriage. Scarlett and I, we've been together for over 20 years. High school sweethearts, believe it or not. We've been through a lot together, but lately it feels like we're just 2 people co-managing a business and raising kids. We don't fight, not really, but the spark? It's flickering, if it's even still there at all. Most nights, we barely talk about anything that doesn't involve work or the kids. I guess that's what happens when life gets in the way, right? The romance fades, and you're left with just routine. Financially, things are tight. We got a mortgage, 2 car payments, college savings to think about, and the clinic. Every month, it's a question of what we can delay paying. We used to take family vacations once a year, maybe head down to Florida or do a quick trip to Europe. But now, those trips feel like a distant memory. Every dollar is either going into the business or keeping the household afloat. Our house is nice though. Suburban, 2 stories, yard out back that I used to take care of, but now we pay the neighbor's kid to mow it because I just can't find the time. Inside? Well, it's lived in. Scarlett keeps it tidy, but with 2 teenagers, there's only so much you could do to keep things from feeling chaotic. We've got the typical upper-middle-class trappings. The SUV for soccer practice runs, the Tesla that was supposed to make me feel better about myself. Spoiler, it didn't. And a house that feels just a little too big and empty now that the kids are more independent. We eat out more than we should, mostly because by the time we both get home, neither of us has the energy to cook. And health? Well, let's just say I'm not in the shape I used to be. I try to hit the gym a few times a week, but most days, I barely have the energy to get out of bed, let alone lift weights or run. Scarlett's in better shape than me. She's got her morning yoga routine that she never skips. But me? I've got back pain from bending over patients all day and a gut that no amount of wishful thinking seems to shrink. Social life? What's that? Between the business, the kids, and trying to keep things afloat, we barely see friends anymore. The few times we do, it's usually because Scarlett organized something with other moms from the kids' schools. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I hung out with friends for fun. It feels like a distant memory. So, yeah, that's my life. A 45-year-old dentist trying to keep a struggling business alive, raise 2 kids who are slowly slipping away from me, and hold on to a marriage that feels like it's just coasting. Every day feels like I'm walking a tightrope, and some days it feels like the net below me is gone. It's amazing how fast things can spiral, you know? 1 minute, you're juggling the usual stuff, work stress, trying to keep the clinic afloat, parenting two teenagers, and the next, it feels like everything's unraveling. I used to think I had a handle on things, even when business started going south. But now it feels like I'm watching my life fall apart in slow motion. Let's start with the clinic. I already told you business hasn't been great. But what started as a slow decline has turned into a full-blown crisis. The numbers just aren't adding up anymore. We're barely breaking even most months, and some months we're in the red. I've had to make some tough calls, letting go of a hygienist, cutting hours for the front desk staff, delaying payments on supplies. Scarlett and I have had so many late-night conversations about whether we can keep going, but every time we think we've hit rock bottom, something else comes along and pushes us further down. Scarlett, man, that's a whole other story. We used to be so in sync, like a team, but now it's like we're on opposite sides of the field, playing different sports. We barely talk unless it's about the clinic or the kids. The intimacy is gone, replaced by this constant tension. And the worst part? I don't even know how to fix it. We've been through so much together, but lately it feels like we're just tired. Both of us. And that's when the cracks really started to show. The fights are different now. Before, we'd argue about normal stuff, money, schedules, who's picking up the kids. Now it's deeper, more personal. She's frustrated with me. I can see that. She says I'm not pulling my weight at the clinic, that I'm too focused on the things we can't control, and not doing enough to change the things we can. And I get it. I really do. But what can I say? I'm doing the best I can, but it never seems like enough. For her. For the business. For me. And then there's my daughter. God, that's a whole mess I never saw coming. She's 15, but she acts like she's 25. We used to be close. Well, as close as you could be with a teenager, but lately she's been pulling away. At first, I thought it was just the usual teenage rebellion. You know, staying out late, talking back, the typical stuff. But then I found out she's been seeing this older guy. I don't know exactly how old, but definitely older than she should be with. Scarlett and I tried talking to her, but it's like talking to a wall. She just tunes us out or gives us that you don't get it attitude. And now there are nights when she doesn't even come home. At first, she'd text to say she was staying at a friend's, but now she just goes. No word, no explanation. And it's killing me. I'm worried sick, but she doesn't care. Every time I try to confront her about it, it turns into a screaming match. Scarlett's no better, she's pissed too, but I can tell she's starting to blame me. She thinks I'm too soft, that I let her get away with too much. Maybe she's right, but I don't know what else to do. If I come down too hard, she'll just push further away, and I'm scared I'll lose her completely. The tension in the house is unbearable. Scarlett and I barely talk, and when we do, it's usually about what we're going to do about our daughter. And I feel like I'm losing that battle too. I'm supposed to protect her, right? But how can I protect her when I don't even know where she is half the time? My son, though, at least there's that. He's 13, and somehow we're still okay. He's more laid back than his sister, more content to just stay out of the drama. We still have our moments, playing video games together or watching a movie on the weekend. He's not oblivious, though. He knows something's up. You can see it in his eyes when he watches me and Scarlett, like he's waiting for the next fight to break out. But he doesn't say anything, and I guess that's his way of coping. I'm grateful, in a weird way, that he's not adding to the chaos. But at the same time, I hate that he's living through this mess. The clinic's failing, my marriage is falling apart, my daughter's going off the rails, and I'm barely keeping it together for my son's sake. Some nights, after everyone's gone to bed, I just sit in the dark in the living room, staring at nothing, wondering how the hell I ended up here. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to be successful, to have a family that was solid. But now I'm just trying to figure out how to stop everything from collapsing all at once. And the worst part? I can't talk to anyone about it. I mean, who do you go to with this kind of stuff? My friends wouldn't get it. Most of them are either living their own version of suburban bliss or dealing with their own crap. Therapy? Maybe. But I'm not even sure where to start unpacking all of this. It feels like there's too many pieces of this broken puzzle, and I don't even know if they still fit together anymore. It's like I'm stuck in this sinking ship, and I'm just bailing water, hoping I can keep it afloat a little longer. But deep down, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up. James started coming into the clinic about 6 months ago. He's 39, a business consultant, and he initially came in for some pretty complicated orthodontic work with Scarlett. At first, he was just another patient, you know? But his appointments were frequent, 2 times a week, sometimes even more when things needed adjusting. And after a while, you start to notice when someone's hanging around that much. He was charming, I'll give him that. Always polite, always asking how things were going with the clinic. He had this easy way about him, like he wasn't just there for the dental work, but to really connect with people. That's probably why he's good at his job. People just seemed to like him. I didn't think much of it at first. He was Scarlett's patient, not mine, so I didn't interact with him a ton. But one day, after he finished up his appointment with Scarlett, he stopped by my office on the way out. I was buried in paperwork, stressed out as usual, trying to figure out how we were going to pay the bills that month. He knocked on the door frame, casual as ever, and asked if I had a minute to chat. I wasn't really in the mood for small talk, but something about his tone made me put the papers down. We got to talking, and before I knew it, I was unloading about the clinic. I didn't even realize how much I had to get off my chest until it all started spilling out. The decline in patients, the rising costs, the fact that Scarlett and I were basically running on fumes trying to keep this place alive. And James? He just listened. He wasn't judgmental or offering cheap advice. He just listened. After I finished venting, he nodded and said something like, I do this kind of thing for a living, helping businesses get back on their feet. I must have given him a skeptical look because he laughed and added, I know, it sounds like I'm selling something. But I'm not. I just think I could help you. No strings attached. I wasn't sure at first. I'd heard of business consultants before, but I always figured they were for bigger companies. People with millions on the line, not small, family-run dental clinics like ours. But James was persistent. Over the next few weeks, he kept dropping by after his appointments, always with a new suggestion or idea. Why don't you try this marketing angle? Or, have you thought about restructuring your payment plans? He had a way of making it sound so easy, like all I had to do was tweak a few things, and suddenly everything would fall into place. Eventually, after about a month of him coming in and offering advice, I gave in. Business wasn't improving on its own, and I was desperate for anything that might help. So, I sat down with him officially outside of clinic hours, and we talked. Really talked. He asked about the history of the clinic, our current patient flow, our expenses, our marketing. I never really thought about it all that deeply. I'm a dentist. I'm supposed to focus on people's teeth, not running a business. But James? He got me thinking differently. He put together this whole plan, free of charge at first, just to show me what he could do. He said it was part of his relationship-building philosophy, that you help people first, and then if it works out, maybe they hire you down the line. I didn't see the harm in it. Besides, the way things were going, it wasn't like I had much to lose. The ideas he came up with? They were solid. Smart even. He suggested rebranding the clinic a bit, making it seem more modern, more tech-savvy. People like that, especially in this day and age where everyone's glued to their phones and looking for the newest thing. He also recommended partnering with local businesses, offering dental plans to their employees, which was something I hadn't even considered before. After a couple of weeks of implementing his suggestions, we started seeing a slight uptick in new patients. It wasn't a flood, but it was enough to make me believe maybe he was onto something. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was completely drowning. Scarlett was on board too. She was the one seeing James the most after all. She mentioned he was always polite, respectful, and seemed genuinely interested in helping out, not just as a patient, but as someone who cared about the clinic's future. I didn't think much of their interactions. After all, Scarlett's a professional. I figured she saw him the same way I did, a useful ally in our business's survival. But then again, looking back, maybe I should have noticed how often she brought him up in conversation, how she'd mention little things he'd said or ideas he had. At the time, it didn't feel weird. We were both desperate for the clinic to succeed, and James was giving us a way to maybe, just maybe, turn things around. It felt like a lifeline. It's funny how things creep up on you, though. How you can be so focused on one thing, saving the business, that you miss the other things happening right under your nose. I didn't think anything of it at the time. James was just a business consultant, Scarlett's patient, and a guy who might help us turn the clinic around. But as the weeks went on, his presence in our lives grew. He started popping by the clinic even when he didn't have an appointment, just to check in. Scarlett seemed to talk to him more and more, not just about the clinic, but about other things. Personal things. I wasn't paying attention then. I was too wrapped up in my own stress and trying to fix everything that I didn't see it. Now, looking back, I wonder if that was the start of something I should have seen coming. It was a regular Tuesday, one of those days where everything felt like it was running on autopilot. I had back-to-back patients, Scarlett had a few appointments, and James had his usual twice-weekly session with her. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what I thought. I remember I needed to ask Scarlett about some paperwork. Just a quick question about our supply order for the month. It wasn't urgent, but I figured I'd pop into her office while she was finishing up with James. They'd been in there a little longer than usual, but sometimes these appointments dragged on. You know how it is. Patients ask a million questions or want to talk about something completely unrelated to their treatment. It happens all the time. Anyway, I walked down the hall toward her office, not thinking much of it. When I got to the door, it was slightly ajar, so I didn't bother knocking. I mean, why would I? She's my wife, and this is our clinic. I stepped inside without making a sound, expecting to see her in the middle of adjusting his braces or something. But that's not what I saw. They weren't working. Scarlett wasn't sitting at her desk or holding any dental tools. Instead, they were sitting close to each other, way closer than they needed to be. James was leaning over, showing her something on his phone. I don't know if it was a video or some pictures, but whatever it was, they were both completely absorbed in it. Scarlett was laughing softly, and James had this look on his face. Charming, relaxed, like he was perfectly at ease in that moment. The thing that really hit me, though, was the way they were interacting. It wasn't just professional or casual, like you'd expect between a dentist and a patient. There was something more there, a softness, an interest. Their shoulders were almost touching, and there was this lightness to their conversation, like they were in their own little world. It wasn't anything explicit, but it felt off. I stood there for a moment, watching them, not really sure what to do. Part of me wanted to walk out, pretend I hadn't seen anything. But another part of me, probably the part that's been wound too tight lately, wanted to make my presence known, to remind them that I was there, that I existed in this equation too. So I cleared my throat. Not loud, but enough to break their little bubble. Scarlett flinched, clearly startled. Her face went pale for a second, and she pulled back from James like she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. James, on the other hand, didn't even blink. He just looked up at me with that same easy smile, the one that probably helps him close all his business deals. "Oh, hey, didn't see you there," James said with a chuckle, waving his phone in the air. "I was just showing Scarlett this hilarious video I found. You've got to see it. It's ridiculous." He acted like nothing was wrong, like the whole thing was a big joke. And honestly, for a second, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a stupid video and I'd walked in at the wrong moment. But Scarlett, she was still rattled, trying to regain her composure. She forced a laugh and said something about how James always finds the craziest things online. I didn't push it then. I just nodded, made some excuse about needing to ask Scarlett about the order, and got out of there. But the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth, like something was off, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. James had turned it into a joke, but it didn't sit right with me. That night at home, I brought it up. I didn't want to come at her aggressively. I didn't have proof that anything was happening, just a feeling. So I tried to be calm about it. We were sitting at the dinner table, the kids upstairs, and I said, "Look, Scarlett, I've been thinking about earlier. I know James has been helping us out a lot, but I don't know. I'm just a little concerned about how close you two seem to be getting." She looked at me, her fork pausing in midair, and sighed like she was expecting this conversation. "Oh, come on," she said, trying to brush it off. "You're being paranoid. James is just a patient, and now a friend, I guess. He's been helping us with the clinic, and I thought you were okay with that." "I am," I said, feeling the knot tighten in my chest. "But when I walked in today, it didn't seem like just business, Scarlett. You looked close." She put her fork down, finally meeting my eyes. "We were just watching a video. You're reading too much into it. There's nothing going on. You've been stressed about the clinic, and I get that, but you need to trust me." The way she said it, it was so matter-of-fact, like the idea of there being anything more between her and James was ridiculous. And maybe I was just being paranoid, seeing things that weren't really there. But I couldn't shake the image of how they'd looked at each other. That kind of ease and interest doesn't just come out of nowhere. But what was I supposed to do? Push harder and risk looking like the jealous, insecure husband? Or let it go and hope I was wrong? Scarlett assured me everything was fine, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had shifted. I tried to let it go after that, but in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the end of it. It felt like a warning, a sign that something was brewing beneath the surface. and I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out what that something was. After that strange incident with Scarlett and James, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I didn't see anything suspicious after that. James kept coming in for his appointments, kept helping out with the clinic, and things actually started to turn around. His business strategies were working, patient numbers were creeping back up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't lying awake at night worrying about bills. It was like a weight had been lifted, and those rays of hope were starting to break through the storm clouds. Scarlett seemed more relaxed too, which I took as a good sign. Maybe I had been overreacting, caught up in the stress of everything. She wasn't acting strange anymore, and there wasn't any more of that odd closeness between her and James, at least not that I noticed. It was business as usual, and things were finally looking up. But while the clinic was improving, my daughter was another story. She'd been growing more distant over the past few months, but I tried to tell myself it was normal teenage stuff. She's 15, after all. This is the age where they push boundaries, test limits. But when she didn't come home for 2 nights in a row, it crossed a line. When she finally walked through the door, it was like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, just the usual attitude like I had no right to question her. I was angry, and I wasn't going to let it slide this time. As a father, it was my job to set boundaries, to teach her what's right and wrong. And not coming home, disappearing for days on end, that's not just rebellious, that's dangerous. So, I confronted her. Maybe I didn't handle it perfectly. I was already wound up, and I came in hot, but what else was I supposed to do? I started in on her, telling her that it wasn't okay for her to stay out all night without telling anyone where she was, that she's still a teenager and there are rules in this house for a reason. Do you even realize how worried we were? I asked, my voice rising as I tried to keep control of my emotions. This isn't about controlling you. It's about your safety. You can't just disappear like that. It's irresponsible. But before I could finish, Scarlett stepped in. She wasn't just defending our daughter. She was downright siding with her, cutting me off like I was the one overreacting. She's 15, for God's sake, Scarlett said, her voice firm and cool. She's growing up, and you need to stop treating her like a child. She can take care of herself. You can't control everything she does. I was floored, absolutely floored. Here I was trying to parent, trying to set boundaries, and Scarlett was basically giving our daughter a free pass to do whatever she wanted. I couldn't believe it. I looked between the two of them, my daughter glaring at me with that defiant teenage look, and Scarlett standing there, arms crossed, completely backing her up. Take care of herself? She's still a kid, Scarlett. I snapped, frustration boiling over. She's not an adult, and staying out all night isn't just growing up. It's reckless. She needs boundaries, not a best friend who lets her do whatever she wants. That's when it really blew up. Scarlett wasn't having it. She turned on me, full force, defending our daughter like I was the bad guy. I don't even remember half the things we said, but the fight was loud, heated, and it cut deep. She accused me of being too controlling, of not trusting our daughter, and of making everything worse by trying to micromanage the situation. I shot back that she was being too lenient, that she wasn't seeing how bad things had gotten, that this wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was dangerous behavior. It was like we were speaking completely different languages. Every point I made about responsibility, safety, and boundaries, Scarlett countered with claims of independence, trust, and letting her grow. It felt like I was alone in this, like Scarlett had jumped ship and was now more on our daughter's side than mine. The fight lasted what felt like forever. I was angry, hurt, and confused. I couldn't understand how Scarlett could see things so differently. I was just trying to protect our daughter, to make sure she didn't end up in some kind of dangerous situation, and Scarlett was acting like I was the problem. The more we argued, the further apart we seemed to drift. In the end, nothing got resolved. Scarlett stormed off, and my daughter retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her. I was left standing there, feeling like I had lost a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. It was like something had shifted in my family, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. That night, I lay in bed next to Scarlett, but we didn't say a word to each other. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I didn't know how we'd gotten here, to this place where we were so divided on something so fundamental. I wanted to protect my daughter, and somehow, that had turned into a war between me and my wife. And honestly, I had no idea where we were supposed to go from here. The next day was brutal, but not in the way I expected. After that massive blowout with Scarlett the night before, we barely said 2 words to each other. It wasn't just silence. It was heavy, suffocating tension. You know, that kind of quiet where everything feels like it could crack with one wrong word? That's what it was like. And honestly, I didn't even have the energy to try to break it. I figured we both needed space, time to cool off. I finished work earlier than Scarlett that day. She had one last patient on her schedule, and I was in no mood to stick around and wait for her. I just wanted to get home, grab a drink, and forget about everything. Let her close up the clinic, deal with the end-of-day stuff. I wasn't in the headspace to care. But as I was driving home, it hit me. I left my laptop back at the clinic. I groaned, annoyed with myself. Of all days to be scatterbrained, it had to be today. I thought about calling Scarlett, asking her to grab it for me, but with the way things were between us, that didn't seem like a good idea. I didn't want to reopen the argument, and I figured it was just easier to turn around and get it myself. So, I drove back. I wasn't planning to stay long. Just grab the laptop and get out before Scarlett and I could cross paths and reignite whatever fire was still burning between us. The building was quiet as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The lights were still on, casting that familiar sterile glow over the place. I assumed Scarlett was finishing up with her last patient, maybe tidying up, preparing to lock up for the night. I didn't bother calling out. I wasn't looking to start another conversation with her after the blow-up we'd had about our daughter. I made my way down the hall toward my office, footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I passed Scarlett's office, something caught my ear. At first, it was just faint, a low, muffled sound. I stopped, straining to listen, unsure of what I was hearing. And then, as I stood there, the sounds became clearer. Moaning. For a second, I froze, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. It was unmistakable. The sound of someone moaning, soft but unmistakably sexual. My heart started to pound in my chest, a cold rush of adrenaline surging through my veins. I took a step closer, my ears now fully locked in on the sounds coming from behind the closed door. The rhythmic noise, the soft rustling, the low gasps, it all hit me at once. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind scrambling for explanations. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I was misinterpreting what I was hearing. Maybe it was something else, anything else. But the more I listened, the more it became undeniable. The sounds of sex. In my clinic, my mind raced. Confusion, shock, disbelief. Each one slammed into me, one after the other, as I stood there unable to move. I wanted to burst through that door, to demand an explanation, to know exactly what the hell was going on. But I couldn't. I just stood there, my hands clenched in a fist at my sides, trying to push down the rising tide of anger, betrayal, and confusion crashing over me. It felt like time had stopped. My chest tightened with every breath, my skin prickling with a mix of heat and cold. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching the scene play out from a distance, unable to stop it, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. The betrayal hit hard, sharp like a knife. My mind flashed back to the fight with Scarlett the night before, the tension between us, the way things had been unraveling slowly, piece by piece. And now this? Here? I couldn't make sense of it. My mind was spinning, trying to grab onto any thread of logic, but all I felt was a growing pit in my stomach, this gnawing sensation of something breaking inside me. I don't know what came over me in that moment. 1 second, I was standing in the hallway, frozen in shock, and the next, a wave of anger just surged through me like a fire I couldn't control. Without thinking, without hesitating, I stormed down the hall towards Scarlett's office. My heart was pounding, my mind blank except for the blinding rage building with every step. I didn't bother knocking. The door flew open as I barged in, the sound of it slamming against the wall echoing through the clinic. And there it was, James, Scarlett, tangled together like some sick nightmare I couldn't wake up from. His body over hers, her hands gripping him, both of them so completely lost in each other that they didn't even notice I was standing there. For a split second, the room felt too small, like the walls were closing in on me, and my entire world shattered right in front of me. The sight of it, it was like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of my lungs. There was no room for doubt anymore, no more confusion or hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. James was f***ing my wife. Scarlett's head snapped toward me as soon as she heard the door crash open. Her eyes went wide with shock, and her face turned pale as if she had seen a ghost. James froze, pulling back slightly, but he didn't move fast enough. His smug face, the one I used to thank for helping me with the clinic, now made me sick to my core. For a second, no one said anything. The silence in that room, despite everything I'd just seen and heard, was deafening. I couldn't even find the words. The rage boiling inside me had my fists clenched, my chest heaving with every breath. The betrayal. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. This wasn't just some mistake, some misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was them choosing each other over everything we had built, over our family, our life. Scarlett didn't say a word. She just stared at me, wide-eyed and terrified, like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming car. But I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't look at either of them without wanting to tear the whole room apart. The anger, the hurt, it was too much. That night felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. After everything I saw, Scarlett, James, I don't even remember how I made it back to my car. It was like my body was moving on autopilot, while my mind was somewhere else entirely, stuck in that room, replaying the image over and over. The fury, the disbelief, the gut-wrenching betrayal. It was all swirling in my head like a tornado, and I couldn't think straight. I drove home, though I don't remember the drive. The whole thing was a blur, like I was floating outside of myself, watching the destruction of my life from a distance. When I got home, the house felt cold, empty, like it wasn't even mine anymore. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, waiting for something to make sense, for something to click. But it didn't. A few hours later, Scarlett came home. I heard the door open quietly, almost as if she was trying to sneak in. I didn't say anything. I didn't have the energy. She walked past me, her face a mask of awkwardness and guilt. She didn't even try to explain herself, didn't apologize or beg for forgiveness. Instead, she went straight upstairs and started packing. I sat there, stunned, watching her pack up her things. The life we'd built together for over 20 years now reduced to suitcases and boxes. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, to ask her why. Why she did this. Why she threw everything away. But I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as she packed up her clothes, her belongings, and left. She didn't say where she was going, but deep down I knew. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was heading straight for James. The house was empty after that. Just me and my thoughts, echoing in the silence. A few days passed, and I barely left the house, barely moved at all. I was in shock, still trying to process everything. It was like the entire foundation of my life had been ripped out from under me, and I was left standing in the ruins. Finally, Scarlett called. We met to talk, though I didn't know what there was left to say. I thought, maybe, she'd feel some regret. Maybe she'd want to try to work things out, to salvage the wreckage of our marriage. But I was wrong. When we sat down, she didn't sugarcoat it. She told me, straight up, that she didn't love me anymore, that she hadn't for a long time. She wanted a divorce, and it wasn't said with sadness or remorse. There was no emotion in her voice, like she was just checking off another task on her to-do list. I was shocked, completely blindsided. I mean, sure, things hadn't been perfect, but I loved her. I still loved her. And I told her that, hoping, praying, that maybe hearing those words would stir something inside her, make her reconsider. I thought, maybe if I could just remind her of everything we'd been through together, everything we'd built, she might want to try to fix things. But when I told her I still loved her, she laughed. Not in a cruel way, but in that dismissive, you don't get it kind of way. The sound of it, it broke something inside me. She was already with James. There was no going back. I was just a chapter she'd already closed. And if that wasn't enough, she and James had been working behind the scenes. Somewhere along the line, they managed to twist things legally, so that the clinic, the business Scarlett and I built together, the one I put my blood, sweat, and tears into, now belonged to her. I don't know how they did it, but they did. Maybe it was through all those business decisions James had helped with. I was too blindsided to see what they'd been planning all along. So, that was that. I lost my wife, I lost the clinic, and I lost my daughter too. She chose to live with Scarlett and James after the divorce. I don't blame her. Teenagers follow the parent they feel understands them more. My son stayed with me, but I wasn't much of a father at that point. I was just there, a shadow of myself. The divorce was quick, clean, and brutal. No drawn-out court battles, no fights over property. Scarlett got the clinic. She got the house. And she got James. And me? I was left with nothing but my thoughts, my son, and an empty life that I barely recognized. The depression hit hard after that. Every day felt like a slog, like I was dragging myself through the mud, trying to make sense of how everything I'd built had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. My world had turned upside down, and I was standing in the rubble, wondering if I'd ever be able to put it back together again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.